Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. When Adriana walked into Betty's office, Betty was lying on the floor. "Oh my God, what's wrong with you?" the girl exclaimed. "I can't even get you up. Now I'll call someone for help." Adriana ran to the manager's office. "Somebody come with me. I need your help urgently." Adriana literally ran into the department. You could see she was very nervous. "What's going on? What's going on? Do you see how much work there is? Try to step away even for a minute. She'll report to the chief. Then write an explanatory note. Why were you absent from work for more than 15 minutes? And missed all the calls from customers?" Michael was indignant. He was a new manager in the department who had only recently taken the job and was therefore afraid of everything. "Come on, let's go. Betty's not well. She fainted. She's lying alone on the floor in her office. I can't even get her on the couch," Adriana exclaimed. Michael jumped up from his seat and ran with her down the long corridor. He had been in love with the senior accountant since day one, but he didn't show his feelings. She is a married woman. She and her husband work in the same department. You can't show affection. It's not appropriate for another man's wife. Michael and Adriana ran into the office. The man picked the woman up in his arms and carried her to the couch. "Maybe we should call an ambulance. Look how pale she is. It could be serious." Michael looked questioningly at Adriana. It wasn't the first time she'd fainted. Adriana knew that. She had gone into Betty's office once before to file reports. That was when she saw the woman lying on the couch. Her eyes were closed, but as soon as she approached her, she responded immediately, saying, "It happens. Mole, overwork in the office air is not enough." What kind of nonsense is that? The office always has an air conditioner, which is regulated according to the temperature outside the window. Adriana thought to herself at the time, but she didn't say anything out loud. She brought a glass of water, left the report on the desk and left. It's none of her business. No ambulance. That's Betty's voice. It's just exhaustion. What's the weather like outside? It's been 30 degrees, then rain and thunderstorms. That would make any healthy person sick. Ethan is still here. Or is he drinking coffee to cool off again? You'll see Ethan. Tell him to come to my house. We'll go. It's the end of the day. Don't stay out too late. Okay, Betty, when I see Ethan, I'll tell him to come to your house," said Adriana. "I've poured you some water. Drink it. I'll go and make some strong tea with sugar. Drink it to stop dizziness." The girl and Michael left the office. Adriana went to the kitchen to make tea, and Michael went to his workplace. "Kathy, I will see you tomorrow at the same time." Michael heard Ethan's voice coming out of the accountant's office. Everyone in the office knew about their business conversations. Every day, Ethan went into Kathy's office and spent several hours there. He was the only manager who was consistently absent from the office. Benjamin watched the cameras every day and fined everyone but him mercilessly. But what kind of fines could there be for having work conversations with Kathy? Just what would the chief accountant and the manager talk about? It's just not clear. Betty's naive soul didn't notice, or pretended not to. Passed over the office gossip as if nothing was going on. What can I say? I don't want to lose my job. And my husband's not a stranger after all. 20 years together. And everyone has affairs. It's no big deal. Or maybe she really didn't notice when there's a whole department to keep an eye on. It's a lot of work. And rumors are rumors. "Your wife asked me to come in," Michael said. Closing the door to Kathy's office behind him, Ethan said she felt sick in there. "She fainted. You go home and take her home." "What happened?" Ethan made an effort to look interested. "You go. She'll tell you herself." "Jesus, there's something wrong with her again. What's the matter with her? When is this going to stop?" Ethan thought to himself as he walked to his office. He'd noticed that Betty had been tired for the last 6 months too, when she'd come home from work and cook and clean the apartment. And now she's got a headache, or sleepy, or at weekends, She barely gets up half an hour in the kitchen to do something and then sleep again. Maybe it's seasonal, or maybe it's age. You can't tell what's in a woman's head, can you? Betty, what's wrong again? I ran into Michael in the hallway. He said you fainted. Come on, let's get ready to go home. Ethan's reporting. It's like he's giving orders in the army. What's your command? I'll finish my tea and then we'll go. Betty replied from the sudden change of weather. I've got a headache. You can't see what's going on outside, hot and cold. I've got blood pressure, by the way. I'm not ironclad, and I'm no longer a girl of age. 20 minutes later, they left the office and drove home. Ethan held his wife's hand, pretending to be concerned. Ethan thought about how much of the family budget would have to be spent on doctors to find out what was going on with her. I couldn't just let it go. She'll collapse, and she won't be able to work. And we have to pay for this, pay for that. And I'm not getting any younger. My teeth have already been treated for so many years. It's time to start saving for implants, so that in 10 years I don't walk like an old grandfather. It will cost at least $1 million, he thought to himself, getting on the bus with his wife. They rode home in silence. Neither he nor she said a single word. Betty, are you still asleep? It's time to get ready for work. Can you make breakfast? I've already showered. We'll eat and go. As her husband looked into the bedroom, Ethan noticed that Betty hadn't set the alarm clock today. Maybe she thought it would wake her up. But I got up almost an hour ago, and she's still asleep, she thought to herself. The husband thought to himself, no, I'm not going to work today. I didn't set the alarm clock either. I'll call Kathy to let her know. I don't feel well. I should call the doctor, Betty said in a sleepy voice. Why would you do that? I was fine yesterday. You said yourself it was just heat exhaustion. Why the doctor? Ethan's voice had a note of displeasure in it that he tried to hide. That's just it, Ethan. What can I do? My eyes are open. I'm blurry. My head hurts like hell. Maybe you should go make yourself some wieners and fry some eggs for breakfast. I can handle myself. At least call a free doctor from the clinic. The paid ones cost about $2,500 for one visit. We're not gonna have enough money for these doctors. I'll handle it. Ethan, have a good day. You lock the door. Okay, great. Now we don't even get breakfast. I'll eat in town, he thought to himself. Ethan dressed quickly and slammed the front door. As soon as he left, Betty called Kathy and told her she was going on sick leave. Half an hour later, he arrived. Where can I wash my hands? Asked a stern, middle-aged man. This way, please. Made Betty an inviting gesture to the bathroom. She could barely stand on her feet. She had been dizzy since the morning. Her eyes were getting darker and darker. But asking her husband to stay home, she absolutely did not want to wash her hands. The doctor came into the room. What's troubling you? He looked questioningly at the woman. Betty told him about the fainting spells and constant headaches. You know these. Intermittently. And since yesterday, they haven't gone away. I've taken my pills, and I slept well, but my head still hurts. What's wrong with me? There was a look of longing in the woman's eyes. She felt more helpless and unhappy than she had ever felt before. The doctor examined Betty carefully, listened to her, and made notes on a special card. What are those bruises on your body? Does your husband beat you? He asked. No, not at all. We have a normal family. The bruises, yes, I must have bumped myself somewhere. Maybe on public transportation, maybe somewhere at home. I don't know, she said quietly. And you're telling me you didn't notice them? I don't believe that. Yes, of course, I've noticed them. Well, they come and go. It happens to everybody. You know what kind of schedule and rhythm we have. If you have to go to the doctor for every bruise, you could quit your job and only treat it. You said it goes away. Yeah, they come and go from time to time. A few months ago, I had a couple bruises. Then they went away. And now they're back. But it's no big deal, really. I can't give you a definitive answer to that question. It's not my area of expertise. but I can say with certainty that bruises don't just appear and disappear. Most likely, you have a blood problem. The hematologist can tell you what kind and how serious. I'll write you a referral. You'll have to make an appointment, take the tests they'll give you, and then we'll see. Are you really that serious, Betty? All I told you is that I'm seeing dizziness, frequent headaches, fainting spells, bruises coming and going, all of which indicate that you may have a blood problem. Don't panic. Early take tests, everything will become clearer, and then already decide what to do. The doctor left. She was left at a loss with a list of referrals in her hands. For the first time in a long time, she was seriously afraid. What if it really is something serious? She thought to herself. On the internet, she found the clinic to which she had been referred. She was lucky to get an appointment with a hematologist tomorrow. To gain strength, Betty went back to bed. She felt abruptly tired right after the doctor left. Never in her life had Betty looked forward to Friday as much as she did now. This day was going to be a pivotal day in her destiny. Exactly 1 week ago, she had gone to the hematologist and taken all the tests. The results were due today. In her heart, she hoped that the doctor's worst predictions would not be confirmed. She hadn't been able to sleep well for a week now, coping with a sudden headache and her thoughts. What if he was right and the preliminary diagnosis was correct? She thought on the way to the clinic. Her health had been stable this week, but occasionally she felt so weak that she went straight to bed. Betty was sleeping almost twice as much as usual these days. Ethan, on the other hand, was angry about everything that was going on. She could feel it. He tried to leave the house very early and late to avoid running into his wife. At that time, Betty didn't even think about where he spent his time. She didn't really care. The only thing that mattered to Betty was her health. When the hematologist told her what he thought after the examination, everything else had taken a back seat and become completely insignificant. She entered the doctor's office on cotton legs. There was an anxious look in her eyes. "Well, are my test results ready? You said I should come back in a week," asked Betty from the doorstep. "Come in, sit down. Don't be nervous." That's what the doctor said. "Of course, I can't make you happy, but there's always hope. So don't despair. We'll talk it over." "What does that mean?" "I've read your test results. Unfortunately, by all accounts, you have leukemia. It's a fatal disease, but we still have time to take action. By my calculations, the permanent effects won't begin until a few months from now. Until then, we need to decide on an operation. It is desirable to do it as soon as possible. What kind of operation, as well as other patients with a similar diagnosis, can bone marrow transplantation help you? But you realize we have a very limited donor pool. It would be nice if one of your relatives could be a match." "Do you have any relatives?" "Just my mom. But she's an elderly person. She's 62 years old. My dad's been dead a long time. Mom could come over." "Unfortunately, no. She's too old for this kind of surgery. It's contraindicated. Your mom can't donate." "Don't you have any other relatives? Brothers and sisters?" "No. I'm the only daughter in the family. If there are no potential donors among your relatives, you'll have to wait for a result from the donor bank. That's unlikely, but it's possible that you'll find a suitable donor in the near future. You can also send requests to foreign donor banks. But you realize this will cost a lot more money than a simple surgery with a domestic donor." "William, but how is that possible? I'm still relatively young. I'm only 38 years old. I've never had any abnormalities or pathologies. I've always been active. I've lived a healthy lifestyle." "How so?" "I thought it was more common in children, young boys. Most of the time it's hereditary. I've got a healthy family." "Betty, you do realize that we assume and God disposes. Medicine is an exact science, but not so exact that it can give a specific explanation for every case, and we have a very limited understanding of leukemia. You read too many books. Little boys have hemophilia. It's hereditary, passed from mother to son. And leukemia. It's a disease that affects no man, woman, or child. It's just that each case is different, and anyone can get it. It's important for us to decide what we're going to do next. How much will the surgery cost? With a domestic donor, about $1.5 million. With a foreign donor, about 3 times that. If I were you, I'd prepare the money, but I wouldn't rely too much on a foreign donor. I'll tell you honestly that most often operations with foreign donors are performed with patients from the same or neighboring countries. Of course, I will send a request, but a donor from abroad will be a real miracle. However, so would a domestic donor. If anything, you have the money to quickly deposit it into the clinic account and start preparing for surgery. I will try to solve this issue in the near future. I have the funds to perform the operation with a domestic donor. Then make an appointment for another checkup. I have to monitor your condition. If your condition worsens, you'll have to go to the hospital. I'll send out the donor banks today. As soon as I have any information, I'll let you know. On her way out of the office, Betty suddenly decided to ask the question, to find out the terrible thing that now haunted her. William, what happens if we don't find a suitable donor? I'd rather not say that. Let's hope for the best. All I'll say is that the consequences will be irreversible, but you will not realize them to the end, as well as all that will begin to happen to your body in a few months. The doctor answered calmly. After leaving the clinic, Betty didn't go to the bus. For some reason, she wanted to go for a walk and get some air. It was as if she felt the value of such simple things that she had neglected for years. Betty didn't even notice it was getting dark. She had walked almost all around the center of town. What a beautiful city. I never even noticed it before, she thought to herself. She took the subway home. Of course, it was more prudent to take a cab. She wouldn't get dizzy or sick again, but she really wanted to get a taste of real life. The smell of the subway, which she hardly remembered anymore from her student days. Since she traveled from work to home, by bus, for long distances, she preferred to call a car. She caught herself thinking that she didn't even care how she told her husband about it. In the back of her mind, Betty realized that his reaction would not be too happy. Doctors, medication, hospital surgery, and that was the best case scenario, if a donor could be found in the next 2 months. And if not, then the slow fading in the hospital room or at home walking under himself, lack of appetite, indifference to himself and the world, inability to even get a glass of water on her own. As she drove up to the house, she decided that she would not put off a long conversation. She would tell everything today. They were family, after all, and they should share all the joys and sorrows together. Betty had expected any reaction of anger, despair, incomprehension, rejection of the situation, but not the one she was facing. This was not what she had expected. Not even her, though she realized she was unlikely to expect sincere support from her husband. "Where have you been so long?" Ethan asked, not even letting Betty undress. "I went to the hematologist. The test results came back today." With indifference in her voice, she replied, "So, what results?" "You're making up non-existent diseases again, like a few years ago with infertility." There was a sneer in his voice. The very thing she sometimes hated him for. Their family had never been perfect. The first few years, when they were young, they'd lived together. And then it was just like everyone else's. Screams, quarrels, scandals, then reconciliation. It never came to violence. But everything else was sometimes in excess. But it was better than being alone. Betty always thought to herself after a fight. But now she was disgusted not so much by his words as by herself. If earlier she hadn't given his reproaches any serious meaning, she'd just laugh and calm down. But now she was very offended. And he always thought he was right. Even when, a few years ago, she had been running around clinics like a lunatic, trying to find out why they couldn't have children. He didn't even deign to go with her and get tested. It never even crossed his mind that it might not be her, but him. So what about me? What could be wrong with me? There's nothing wrong with me. It's you women who are always worrying about these things. A man is a man. What could be wrong with my health? That's pretty much what he said every time Betty asked him to take a test. Back then, several doctors had said they were incompatible, but it was as if he didn't hear her, or rather just didn't want to hear her. What could he say to her if it turned out that he was just as much to blame as she was? And so he used it advantageously at every opportunity. You didn't give me a son, but I still live with you. I'm not going anywhere. Be grateful to me. For some reason, it was now in her head the most unfavorable moments of their family life. For many years, they had accumulated a lot of them, but still there were those that especially made her angry. And everything that in one way or another concerned the children belonged to such moments. He'd never been tested. She was not diagnosed with any impediment to childbearing, but it was still her fault. Leukemia, answered Betty's husband briefly, walking into the room. The test results show that I have leukemia. There can be no mistake. The doctor double-checked everything several times to make sure. I'm sure Ethan must have been visibly shaken. He didn't know what to say to that. On the one hand, he did feel genuinely sorry for her. He remembered Betty as the student he'd fallen in love with 20 years ago, when they'd first crossed paths in the corridor of the university. They studied at different faculties. Their meeting was fateful in its own way, but more for him than for her, for a simple boy from a poor provincial family. This native of the capital with his mother, her apartment in the heart of the city was a real boon. He does not even remember what prompted him to propose to her after 6 months of acquaintance. Was it love or the desire to settle down in the capital? He sincerely didn't want her to die, but neither did the long months of nursing care, the expense of life-sustaining drugs, the weekends spent in the hospital fit into his plans, especially since he'd met her. She's so bright, so different. She and Betty are only 2 years apart in age, but their looks, their thinking, their lifestyles are vastly different. When the head accountant retired, Kathy took her place. He immediately realized that she was the woman of his dreams. He did not expect reciprocity, and at first he was even shy to give her signs of attention. Everything spun on its own. For all this time, he did not even think about whether Betty guesses. He didn't really care. Ethan was sure that even if she found out, she wouldn't divorce him. If she married, she would only marry once and for all. If a husband, then a man close, no matter how he was or how he behaved. He knew it. They lived by habit, by the beaten path, and it suited him and her. What's the prognosis? What did the doctor say? Staring at one point, he asked. It sounded like he hadn't had time to think of what to ask yet. He put me on the waiting list for the donor bank. We will wait for a suitable donor. In the meantime, I'll be seeing him regularly. He's supposed to monitor my condition. If I feel worse, I'll go to the hospital, Betty said. That's how it is now. How are you feeling? I'm fine now. Make some tea, please, if you don't mind. He went to the kitchen and thought about how to start this difficult conversation. But how long would she live if there was no suitable donor? 3 to 4 months, 6 months. But she won't be able to live on her own. After a month, she'll start to weaken. She'll need nursing care. I'll have to quit my job and be by her side all the time. And then what? Ethan thought to himself. Ethan knew that if Betty died, he would get nothing. At one time, Christina had exchanged her apartment in the center of the capital in such a way as to make one 2-room and the other 1-room. There was no other way. A large meterage could be gained only if the apartments would be quite far from the center. This option did not suit her categorically. She gave Betty a 2-room apartment, but very conditionally for the future. When she got married, if she had children in this apartment, they moved in. Right after the wedding, Christina only registered it on herself. Son-in-law, she did not particularly complain, but was forced to come to terms with the choice of her daughter. As he remembers now, this overheard conversation. Betty, isn't he from the capital? Christina asked worriedly, when they went into the kitchen to make tea. Was it the day they met the parents? No, but who cares? The main thing is that the person is good, replied Betty, then 20 years ago, in love to the core. Her mother-in-law's attitude hasn't changed since then. She almost never came to visit them so as not to cross paths. Christina was careful not to talk about her husband in front of her daughter. She didn't want to fight. This is the moment. I'll ask her directly. After all, what have I got to lose? Ethan thought to himself. Betty, is your tea ready? He said, bringing the tray into the room. Listen, I've been meaning to ask you something. Christina, you never said anything about her signing the apartment over to you. Betty knew what the question was about, but she hadn't expected such blatant insolence. She thought that he would have enough conscience to stay with her until the end, at least for the sake of the previous 20 years of their life together. At least for the sake of the fact that she had opened the capital for him and helped him to settle down in a foreign city. At least for the sake of the fact that thanks to her and his mother, he did not have to return to his backwater after graduation for lack of money for rented accommodation and for life. But he didn't have enough. And why? What difference does it make? Pretending not to understand what it was about, Betty replied. Yes, it makes a lot of difference, Betty. You know what kind of life we're going to have. I'll have to quit my job for the next 6 months to take care of you. You won't be able to take care of yourself anytime soon. If you don't find a donor, that's 6 months at least. And if you do find a donor, it's surgery. It's not just money, it's time. And I'm sorry I didn't mention that. And if all the efforts and money spent are in vain, I'll have to go out on the street. Ethan didn't say what would happen if she died, but it was more than understandable. Because of the headache, she didn't fully understand what was going on, so she couldn't react right away. They were silent for about 10 minutes, after which Betty said, You've been with me all these years, for the capital and the apartment. Betty, you're exaggerating everything. God, you're making a fight out of nothing. Asking questions, inquiring, of course not. It's just me too. You know what? I need assurances that I won't be out of a job or a roof over my head. You wouldn't ask that question if you were me. There was a note of anger and frustration in his voice. No, Ethan, I'd be wondering what I could do to make sure my loved one survived. What can I personally do to make that happen? But you don't consider me a loved one for a long time, do you? You live with me out of habit. Because there's nowhere else to go. She couldn't believe she'd said it so easily. She never would have said it out loud before. Oh, come on, Betty. That's not what this is about. Of course you're my wife. And I love you. And every family has its quarrels. Are we any better than anyone else? Calm down. Everything's gonna be okay. Ethan tried to hug her. Fighting was unprofitable, at least for now. He tried his best to smooth over the rough edges, not realizing he'd just revealed his true colors. I won't ask my mom to sign the apartment over to me. She'll own it until I die. Or we'll sell it to pay for a donor, surgery, and rehab. Quietly, but very clearly and firmly, Betty said. The words made Ethan more than a little angry. He pounded his fist on the coffee table so that the tea almost spilled out of the cup, and then yelled, Well, I'm sorry, darling. In that case, I won't be taking pots out for you for 6 months. I don't want to be an unemployed bum and wander around the capital's train stations in search of food. And I don't want to go back to my own backwoods either. I'm not a boy anymore. I'm 38 years old. I want stability and confidence in the future, and to deprive me of that is unfair, to say the least. My husband went to his room and packed his suitcase. When he left the apartment, Betty was already asleep. The next day, he and her mom changed the locks. Hey, aren't you happy to see me? Ethan looked at Kathy in surprise. Meet your guest, dear Kathy. I did what I promised you a long time ago. Kathy was indeed surprised. Her emotions could not be put into words. When they had gone to her apartment a couple of times during working hours to have a human lunch, she'd never thought he'd memorize the address and come here someday, even at this late hour. Why are you like a statue? Are you really not happy with me? Ethan has already thrown the suitcases over the threshold. Come on, Let me go through. I'll tell you all about it. I don't really know. Of course you can come in. It's just that it's all so sudden. She finally managed to say something. What happened? I left my wife. Now we can live together. We won't have to hide from anyone. Remember, you wanted this, didn't you? We've talked about it so many times, and I never dared. But now I do. What about Betty? How's she feeling, by the way? She called, said she's on sick leave for 2 weeks. Might have to extend it. She's fine. Ethan didn't tell her about the diagnosis. She'd think he'd defected because she was ill. Do you want tea, coffee? If you're hungry, there's food downstairs in the cafe. I didn't cook anything today. I didn't have time. I took some work home. I didn't have time to finish some work at the office, Kathy said distantly. All she could think about was how not to say that she was never going to have a serious relationship with Ethan. Yes, of course she'd asked him about leaving his wife. Made plans for a life together. But that was just for conversation. All mistresses ask that. Otherwise, what kind of mistresses are they? Act interested. It's one of the main strategies of their game. In reality, her life suited her just fine. She'd been living alone for years and had gotten used to it and didn't need cohabitation. Okay, I'll tell it like it is. Why should I be afraid of anything? She thought to herself. Ethan. That's the way it starts, Kathy. Well, you can stay at my place tonight, of course, but after that, get your own place. I'm on the payroll. We'll see each other like we used to. I'll be able to come visit you. You come to me at work, and we'll stop hiding from everyone. Maybe in the future we can start living together. Wait, I don't understand. What do you mean? A one-night stand? What do you mean? With genuine surprise in his voice, asked the man. What about our plans together? And what about all those yours, when you leave your wife? I love only you. We will live together, not hide from anyone. Was that all a lie? But don't get me wrong. That's not how things work. You have to have thought it through beforehand, planned it out. What's that supposed to mean? You left Betty yesterday, and today you moved in with me. What are people gonna say? By the way, I'm in a serious position. I don't want to lose my reputation with my coworkers. You don't think it's affecting your reputation that we're dating? Well, first of all, no one knows about it yet. Secondly, we're going to make our relationship a little more public. Like you've split up with Betty, you're just being friendly with me as a colleague. Then we can open the veil a little bit more. Yes, people, Kathy, are not blind. Everyone knows about everything for a long time. Or do you think they don't know what you and I do in the office during office hours? And why I'm in there so often half the day of the workplace? The lack of lies looked extremely ridiculous. The arguments were ridiculous and obviously false. She realized it herself, as well as the fact that everyone had known about everything for a long time. But she couldn't think of anything else to say. Okay, Ethan, I'm done talking. You want to stay the night tonight. You don't want to go to the hotel. It's bedtime. I got to get up early for work tomorrow, and I got reports to do. I need them done by morning. I don't get enough sleep as it is if you decide to stay here. The laundry and stuff are in the room by the kitchen, Kathy said, and went to her room. Okay, she's right. I do have to get up early in the morning tonight at her place, and we'll talk more tomorrow. Ethan thought to himself that there would be nothing more to talk about. He couldn't have imagined it. If anyone he expected to stab him in the back, it wasn't her. They drove to work separately. Ethan hadn't been able to talk to Kathy since morning. She had left much earlier than he had. When Ethan woke up, there was a note on the table telling him what to eat. Find tea and coffee in the refrigerator in the left locker on your way out. Pick up the suitcase with your stuff on the door. Pull the handle up. It'll lock. I didn't leave any keys. She's clearly letting him know she's not coming back. Shit, I have to put the suitcase somewhere else, so that no one at work would ask questions. He thought to himself. Ethan called several hotels near Kathy's house. The prices were very high, and there were almost no rooms available. There was only one. He took his things there and went to work. Kathy's house was a short walk from the office, so he had time to get everything done and not even be late. "Ethan, come in here." Benjamin came to his desk. "I have a very serious conversation with you. I wonder what the chief could possibly need. It's not like I was late for work today. What claims could I have against me?" He thought to himself. The mere request made him uneasy, but Ethan did his best to pretend that he was completely calm. "Benjamin Can." Asked to come in by opening the door to the office, Ethan said. "Do you have to knock at all?" Answered the chief. "Come in. Close the door behind you. I'm listening to you very carefully, Benjamin. Look, what a bad situation we have. You've been absent from work for more than 5 working days out of a month. That's on the security cameras, as well as the fact that during one working day you were absent for more than 4 hours in a row. You do realize that's a good reason for a summary dismissal, but that's not the most important thing." When Ethan heard these words, he turned pale. He didn't understand what was going on. Benjamin knew perfectly well that he was often absent from his workplace. Did he know why? He'd never mentioned it. His relationship with Kathy had long been a cause for gossip and conversation over coffee, but simultaneously taboo. Look at your personal component sales figures from last quarter. Now take a look at how much you personally sold in this one. Benjamin continued, spreading out the printouts with graphs on the table. The results fell by exactly 3 times, which is the most unsatisfactory performance in the department. Not to mention that we handle only incoming requests, of which you have missed exactly 100 in the last month. So many incoming calls, and you didn't take any for that month. Some customers could not reach us for hours to place orders. This is evidenced by numerous complaints to the support and quality control hotline. What do you have to say for yourself? Benjamin, but you know all about it. What do you want me to say? I've often been summoned by Kathy to discuss profits. What do you mean? What profit? Do you have any idea what a chief accountant does? Don't lie to me. He did have a mediocre idea of what the head accountant did and what he was responsible for, as well as the rest of the accounting department. He didn't even know what his wife was in charge of. Betty said the first thing that came into his head and said it badly. "You'll write your own resignation. Or shall we formalize the dismissal by article?" He looked sternly at Ethan. "Benjamin, what? What resignation? What are you talking about?" Ethan couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Well, give me a ticket like the rest of the employees who are absent from work. Why would you fire me? I didn't do anything wrong. Benjamin, even if we deducted 6 months' salary, we wouldn't cover the epicenter of the damage you've done to the company. File a report. If you do it yourself, at least you won't have a stain on your employment record. You'll be able to get a job at some small firm. And don't even come for references for a new job." Ethan realized he had no other choice. What a bitch. I thought to myself, he decided to throw me not only out of his life, but to deprive me of work in general. Everything in the capital and small companies and all the salaries are black. And it's good if they pay anything at all. No social packages, no sick leave. And the salaries in most of them. Ridiculous. He realized he could hardly get a job in a big company anymore. Almost everywhere require references from a previous job, and even more so in such a narrow field. "You'll pick up your employment history book at the HR department this afternoon," Benjamin said as he signed the application. "Yeah, I didn't see that coming. If it wasn't for Betty, I'd have been fired a long time ago. And I never would have gotten the job without her to vouch for me. Resumes week. No work experience. But she's been so helpful in her time. I thought you'd be a decent person. But no. Goodbye, Ethan." He couldn't believe her betrayal. She didn't want to be together. But why would she do that? It's not like I was imposing on her. I came over, but it was late. I wanted to move in with her tonight, live with her. But what's the big deal? If she said so herself many times, asked about divorcing his wife. He thought on the way back to the hotel. Going back to Betty was stupid, and she wasn't likely to bounce back so quickly after everything that had happened. Ethan was prepared to do anything to avoid difficulties he hadn't encountered in years. He had a good roof over his head, a wife with a decent salary, and he made a good living, but he never saved anything. He believed that if he didn't become a millionaire, there was no point in collecting a few dollars each. He'd squander it anyway. That's how it worked. It's been a long time since I've been to my homeland, Ethan thought to himself as he lay in the hotel. It was time to visit my mother and sister. He went to the website, looked up the tickets. Departure at 3. At 8:30, he was already in Murrum. "Clara, meet your brother. Why aren't you happy? Where's Mom?" said Ethan from the doorstep when his sister opened the door to the apartment. "You're going to keep me in the hallway. Move aside." An old woman came out of the room. "Ethan's here. He hasn't visited us in 100 years. He forgot all about his mother in his capital city." The mother greeted her son. "Are you coming for a long visit?" "No, Mom's on vacation." Ethan had already gone to his room to put things away. "Come in, we'll have tea. Tell me about your life and Betty." The mother was genuinely happy to see her son, but the sister looked reproachful. She knew what kind of man her brother was, but her mother always felt sorry for him. But she had long ago had no kinship feelings, and she was not happy to see him and did not even hide it. "Mom, but let's look at the situation realistically. You will not have time to sell the apartment so quickly." Betty tried to make Christina understand. "We have to look for money elsewhere or get off the waiting list for a foreign donor. We can't afford that kind of money. We have nowhere to get it. So we have to wait for a suitable domestic donor to come along and pay for the surgery right away, so we don't get ahead of the curve." Betty's condition worsened a week ago. She's been in the hospital for 2 weeks under medical supervision. Christina visited her every day and tried to find money so that they could qualify for the operation with a foreign donor. No consoling prognoses were given by the doctors anymore. On the contrary, with each passing day, the chances decreased. Betty was getting weaker and weaker. Most of the time she just slept, waking only to eat. But sometimes there was no appetite. There was still no news from the donor bank. The doctor had warned that the registry was small. The number of new donors was not only limited, but not everyone would be a match. In the back of her mind, Betty was hopeful. But with each passing day, it seemed to her more and more that it was just an illusion. It's hard to admit to yourself that you're doomed. It's probably the hardest thing anyone can face. Ethan never called, not even to check on her well-being. Betty was sure he'd come back because he had nowhere else to go in the capital. And 20 years of his life couldn't be erased for nothing. She hoped those words about the pots and the apartment had been spoken in the heat of the moment. He didn't really mean it. He just felt bad that he hadn't been able to have a meaningful career in so many years. He wanted guarantees, and he was understandable too. Betty felt sorry for her husband, and he'd taken her and the years they'd spent together out of her life. He just disappeared. Legally, he was still her close relative, but in reality, he was no one. She tried not to think about it. It wasn't the point. In the last few days, it had all come down to waiting for a donor. The disease was progressing. There was nothing she could do about it. What if we put up a mortgage? Put our one-bedroom apartment up for mortgage or foreclosure? I've heard of that. The money would be available at once, and we could pay for the services of a foreign donor at any time. Christina continued. "Well, what bail? What ransom? What the hell are you talking about, Betty? You'll get at best 30% of the value of the apartment. If you find someone who will buy it back quickly, they will give you the minimum value. And all these organizations and so-called investors are criminal. And you realize that. You want to get into something, but you gotta do something." The woman wouldn't calm down. "Maybe apply to a bank. They'd lend against real estate, right?" "Aha. What's the payback?" "Do not forget that although I continue to receive a salary on sick leave, but this money is clearly not enough to pay such a loan. Because if the bank will agree to lend that much, it'll be at a very high interest rate and for a short period of time. No, Mom, these options are not the answer. We have to think of something else." Christina looked at her and was amazed. Being in such a state, she can still think about something to weigh, analyze, cancel the unfavorable options. Any other person in her place would have been panicking and hysterical, talking only about her inevitable demise. Any person would have agreed to give for life not only the apartment, but everything they have. And Betty managed to think, even in such a difficult situation, worried not only about herself, but also about the family property, for the sake of which at one time her mother and father had worked all their lives. "May I see you?" A man came into the room with fruit. "Betty, look, Michael is here," Christina said happily. "He visited her very often, ever since he found out she was sick. Word travels fast in the office. So a little bird on his tail brought bad news. A week after Betty took sick leave, he wanted to call her the first day. But then he thought it was wrong. After all, she was a married woman, and her husband wouldn't be happy to have a stranger meddling in their lives. But when Ethan was fired from his job, Michael just decided to see if he needed any financial help. After all, an unemployed husband and a seriously ill wife. He asked Kathy for her phone number. She made it easy for him. He didn't even call Betty beforehand to see if it was appropriate. He called the same night. It turned out that Ethan wasn't around, and she was getting progressively worse. The day after their conversation, she was taken to the hospital. "Betty, how are you feeling? I brought you some fruit." "I don't know." "Ask the doctor if you can eat it." "I don't know if you can't. It'll just make it worse. I mean, it's like I'm doing it out of the goodness of my heart." With a note of sincere concern in his voice, said Michael, "By the way, I have some news for you. I don't know if it's good or not. Let's not guess. Tell Michael. We need good news like air right now." Christina smiled. If she had no sympathy for Ethan, she liked Michael at first sight. They hadn't known each other very long, and Christina had already made it clear that she didn't mind if she and Betty had a relationship in the future. Betty hadn't even thought about it. Of course, she was grateful for Michael's support and friendship, but nothing more. In the back of her mind, she thought about Ethan all the time. Had he really proposed to her 20 years ago for the sake of the apartment in the capital and lived with her all these years, just so he wouldn't have to go back to the middle of nowhere? These thoughts did not give her peace. How could she be so wrong about a man? I sent letters to several charitable foundations, wrote that it was an urgent emergency, and it was very important for us to be able to qualify for surgery with a foreign donor. I also wrote a letter to the program of these difficult human destinies. They often help to raise money for recovery operations for the seriously ill, Michael continued. "Oh, really? It's all a scam. They pay money to viewers to come to the studio to tell their stories, and thus raise their ratings. You want us to embarrass the whole country." Christina clearly didn't like Michael's suggestions. "First of all, you've got it all wrong. Second of all, you're dead wrong. But what's wrong with going to this program to save Betty? On the contrary, it will allow us to raise a large sum of money in a short period of time. And finally, thirdly, Christina, no one has responded, offered, or invited us anywhere yet. We just have to do something. I can't do nothing." Michael, thank you so much for your support, for your participation, for everything. You're not just a really nice person. You're a real friend who never leaves a man behind, Betty said, looking into his eyes with genuine gratitude. Their conversation was interrupted by a doctor who entered the room. "Good afternoon. I have some good news for you." "Christina, come with me. We need to talk," said William. The woman left the room and followed the doctor. "Our application has been answered, and there is a donor from a foreign data bank," William said without preamble. "But you realize that we are not alone. There are other people who are also applying for surgery with this donor. To reserve the donor for yourself, you need to deposit at least 20 to 30% of the amount. Then we will be able to perform the operation in a week after all the necessary documents have been drawn up, and the donor material is delivered to us. But you know that now we don't have the full amount. We only have a portion. And what if we contribute, But we can't find the rest of the money. Christina asked. Then the operation will have to be canceled, and this donor material will be given to another patient. It's up to you. There's no time to think. I need to talk to my daughter. I'll see you in my office in 20 minutes. Try to get this done quickly so I can confirm the request, and we're not ahead of the curve. The data is updated every hour, and if there is a patient on the application list who is ready to pay the full amount, we may be beaten to the punch. Christina was both relieved and anxious at the same time. Of course we have to take it. There might not be another chance. In a month's time, it would be days, not weeks. Betty, William has good news for us. Christina literally ran into the room and found a donor with suitable material overseas. We should be able to do the operation in a week. Payment can be made in installments. The necessary amount to make a deposit so that the foreign clinic has prepared all the documents. The donor came to us. We have it. But what about the rest of the money? Where will we get it? Betty asked in surprise. We don't have the whole amount on hand. It won't just appear out of thin air. Betty, do you have any idea what you're talking about? It's like you're in some kind of stupor. You've been lying here in a hospital bed almost all day long. You're sleeping and your days are numbered. What money? What money? What are you talking about? Christina was really pissed off. She had always prided herself on her daughter's courage and restraint. But now her behavior was getting annoying. If anything, I'll put up the apartment as collateral. God help her, we'll live in one. It's no big deal. Yes, we'll lose money, but I only have one daughter. I can add another 500,000. I have savings, and then we'd have another 1 million. 500,000 plus incidentals. I've calculated everything at about 300,000, Michael said. Christina, go tell William we're in. Have them start the paperwork. Betty was amazed at what Michael had done. A complete stranger. A man she barely knew was willing to give up his savings to save her life. She thought of Ethan again, and sad. He probably doesn't even think about me. He doesn't care about me, how I am. If I had the apartment to myself, he'd be around every day. He's gone. She thought to herself. What was she thinking about? Her thoughts were interrupted by Michael. This is so great. You've found the right donor. You'll have the operation. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. I don't really believe that, to be honest. Where are we gonna find the rest of the money if we can't get a mortgage on the apartment? No one's gonna give us a loan. And if we do, we'll have to cancel the surgery. And then there's the rest. Well, you know all about it. You heard the prognosis William gave me. Nothing comforting. Betty's eyes are sad again. That's not what you're thinking about. You're thinking about sadness and wistfulness. You should think of the good things, how you'll start your life again when you're well again. It's such a rare stroke of luck. Some people wait months for donors, and some people don't wait at all. We'll find the money. I told you I sent letters to the charities. I'll send more today. Maybe we'll get lucky again, and one of the foundations will agree to open an emergency collection. Sorry to interrupt. Betty, you need to sign some papers. I'll have to get them here. Or can you walk to my office? William asked, through the open door. Sure. I'll be right there. The papers were ready. Christina went to the bank to transfer the money. The old-fashioned way, she kept it in a safety deposit box instead of an account. At least she didn't have to worry that the bank could refuse to issue a large sum of money from the account in an emergency. Once again, the woman praised herself for her foresight. At one time, on the advice of her mother, Betty had started saving money into her account. She thought that when her mother became infirm and old, she would be able to use the money. It was for her sake that Betty saved the money. Who knew that fate would turn around and she would need help? Okay, Betty, I'll go, you rest. I'll come and see you tomorrow. We'll take shifts with Christina so that neither of us will be too tired. Michael grinned. Come on, Michael, goodbye. Thank you again for your friendship and support. When he got home, he saw several missed calls. The subway connection was going out. Michael began frantically calling back unknown numbers. "Good afternoon. Did you leave us a request?" There was a young girl's voice on the other end of the line. It was the call he had been hoping for and waiting for. "Good evening, Michael. You left an application in our charity fund, Win Together, to collect money for Betty's bone marrow transplant operation," said a female voice in the receiver. "We are ready to organize the collection of targeted financial assistance after providing supporting documents." Good evening. Yes, I submitted my application. Thank you very much. You do not realize what you have done for us. What documents and where should I drop off?" Michael asked excitedly. "You can come tomorrow from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. at the address Voznesensky Lane, 22, office 315, entrance from the courtyard, a large iron door. The name of our charitable foundation is written on it. You need to bring your passport, bank account details, an extract from the card, a sick card with the stamp of the treatment clinic. The card must contain the diagnosis. Thank you very much. I'll be sure to come over." He couldn't believe that his letters had gotten results. It was unbelievable. He immediately called Christina and Betty. The doctor should have the discharge papers ready by tomorrow. The sooner the better. "Betty, William, still there?" Michael's voice sounded excited. "Can you believe the charity Winning Together is ready to open a collection for us? It's a real miracle. We'll have the full amount by the time the surgery's done." "Yeah, he hasn't left yet. I already asked. He said he'd have it ready by morning. You should be here around 10 o'clock. I'm sure he'll have it all set up by then," Betty replied. "Michael, thank you so much. I'll see you all tomorrow. I'll be there at 10 o'clock. For the first time in a long time. He sounded cheerful. He believed that everything would work out. The world is not without good people. At 10 o'clock he was already at the clinic, and immediately from there, he went to the charity fund, familiarization documents, attached to the website, and posted in all groups in social networks. Tell me, have you opened fundraisers through other charities before? Or maybe you tried to raise money through social networks on your own? A staff member clarified. No, I thought about starting to raise money myself, but then I decided that it was not only too risky, but also unlikely to raise the necessary amount of money in a short period of time. You know how many scammers there are in our country. After all, official organizations are more trustworthy. Michael replied, Yes, you did the right thing. We are glad you came to us. Can you tell me how long it takes to raise that amount of money? We've opened a fundraiser for $2.5 million. That's more than you originally asked for. But it's a safety net. Betty may need to pay for surgery-related, additional recovery, and rehabilitation costs. We can open a separate collection if the need arises. I got it. Thank you very much. And the funds will be deposited into your account. Is that correct? Yes, all funds will be deposited into the charity's account. Every day we'll send you a report on how much we've raised. As soon as the collection is closed, we'll transfer all the funds to your account. Sorry, if we are not able to collect this amount by the appointed date. In this case, we will transfer to you those funds that we managed to collect. You will be able to spend them in any case. After the collection closes, we will post all the necessary reports on our website and social networks. Okay, I understand. Thank you. I'll be in touch. Goodbye, Michael. We'll be sending reports on the amounts raised, sent to your email and text messages. So happy. Michael had never been before. Immediately after the foundation, he drove back to the hospital to see Betty. He wanted to tell her everything himself. As he got off the subway, he heard the phone ringing. Yes, I'm listening, Michael answered. Good afternoon, Michael. This time, it was a stern male voice. Yes, it's me. I'm the editor of the program, These Heavy Human Destinies. You wrote us a letter. We'd like to invite you and your friend to be on our live program. You know, we've already arranged a fundraiser with a charity, and Betty is a woman who needs an emergency operation. Unfortunately, she can't take part in any programs right now. She's in the hospital getting ready for surgery, and she's not feeling well. Oh, really? Is there any chance of recovery? Yes, of course there are. And not just any chance. She's gonna be fine. Do you hear me? She will. You could have gone alone. Our viewers will be very interested to hear the story of this courageous woman, even if not firsthand. Betty could be an example to thousands of women across the country. You know, I have to agree with Betty. Now I think it's the right thing to do. Yeah, sure. Call me back at the number that came up on your incoming call. Extension 3315. Okay, thank you. Goodbye. That call was no longer important. He'd done the most important thing. He'd made a deal with a charitable foundation. Television popularity wasn't important in this situation, but when he got to the hospital, he still asked Betty what she thought about it. You know, Michael, I don't mind at all. My mom's the one who's skeptical of these kinds of shows. I'm the one who's skeptical. If your letter was chosen out of hundreds of thousands of others, of course you should come, she said. You can tell them everything openly there. I'll allow it. Maybe my story will really inspire someone. If the operation is successful and I still live, I'll come to the airwaves myself. If they call me, of course. I've been meaning to ask you, how's your job? Do you come to see me all the time? They'll fire me. I've taken a leave of absence. Look, what's the difference? Let them fire me if they want to. It's like the first job I've ever had. Of course, it'll be unpleasant if there's a record of dismissal right after the probationary period. I just got the job 4 months ago. But it's not critical. I have a lot of experience. I'll find another job if I need it. Right now, the most important thing is your health. Betty's mood was getting better every day. It was as if she had hope for something better and brighter in her life, something she hadn't had in years. And it wasn't just her health. The week flew by like a blink of an eye. The staff of the charity managed to raise not only all the money needed for the second payment of the operation, and even more. After Michael visited the program, not indifferent viewers sent money to the account of the channel's fund. Will these funds remain for recovery, or if there is a need for a second operation tomorrow? He thought to himself. He would spend the whole day tomorrow in the hospital. Michael and Christina arrived at the hospital first thing in the morning. The surgery was scheduled for 3, so they had time to see Betty. Mom, what are you worried about? It's not like it's some complicated surgery with a long recovery time of only 2 hours. Then I'll sleep, and the next day I'll be able to walk on my own. Eat, socialize, just like before. I'll just feel better than I have in days, Betty reassured me. Christina, she really wasn't afraid. What did she have to be afraid of? She remembered the last few days very vaguely. Constant headaches and sleep. Sometimes she couldn't even wake up to eat. She had so little energy. The chemotherapy was taking its toll on her condition. Betty really wanted it to be over as soon as possible. What about the whole year of recovery? If the donor bone marrow doesn't take root, she will have to have a second operation. Christina couldn't calm down. She had been very anxious all week, and it was still there now. Why think about the bad? You have to think about the good. William will monitor my condition. If anything goes wrong, I'll have another surgery. That's life. There's nothing you can do about it. I'll take your word for it. Betty, I'm going to interrupt your conversation with Michael. Christina, what are you really so worried about? I guess Betty told us not to come tonight for a reason. But how could I not? All that effort, and what if it was all for nothing? What if the woman kept sharing her worries? Christina, can I talk to Betty alone? Michael asked. You're kicking me out. The woman gave a hurt look. Okay, fine. I'll wait in the hallway. He decided to say it now, without waiting for the operation to be over. Michael had made up his mind a long time ago. Betty, I wanted to tell you. Well, when this is all over, you're gonna get better and start a new life. Think about marrying me. I'm not insisting or even expecting you to say anything right away. It's just that if you ever reciprocate my feelings, I'll be happy. He pulled a ring out of his pants pocket and held it out to her. Betty realized that sooner or later their relationship would go from friendship to something more, but she didn't think it would happen so quickly. She didn't know what to say to that. Everything was happening too fast in her life. That's why she was already confused about her own feelings. A year ago, she could not have imagined that she would be diagnosed with a fatal disease and would have to fight for her life, as well as her husband leaving her. Just like that, in one day, the man she had spent 20 years with, whom she had known since she was a student. Her calm, measured life in an instant turned into a real hurricane, which tears down literally everything in its path. In case you've forgotten, I'm married. She couldn't think of any other answer. I told you I don't expect an answer right now, and I don't expect you to make any immediate decisions. If you ever realize you need me, just know this. I love you and I'll wait for you for as long as it takes, a year, 2 years, or longer. Just know that, and during recovery, I will be there for you. I'm sorry, but we have to get ready for surgery. William walked into the room without knocking. Michael and Betty didn't even notice that they had talked for almost an hour. They spent the same amount of time reassuring Christina. Please leave the room. Yes, of course. I'm just leaving now. Michael got up from his chair and headed for the exit. Uday, Betty, William, we can have a word with you. Christina and I have a few questions for you. Any questions? We'll talk later. After the surgery, Betty will need to rest. You can visit her tomorrow. Then we can discuss whatever you're interested in. Michael and Christina left the clinic and drove home. This was a day they all just had to get through. Nothing else depended on them. When Michael entered the room, Betty was still asleep. He decided not to wake her. It's hard to imagine what it was like for her yesterday. Christina and I were constantly thinking about ourselves, our worries, our anxieties. And for some reason we didn't think about how Betty felt, not in terms of her physical well-being. What about her soul? He thought to himself. From William, he wanted to hear the truth and nothing more than that. Usually doctors do not tell mothers and close relatives everything, so as not to create premature panic. He needs to tell him the truth. William, I'm coming in. Michael opened the door. I told you yesterday that I really need to discuss Betty's condition with you. I want you to tell me the truth as it really is, without embellishment. Have a seat. William made an inviting gesture. I'm a doctor and I tell the truth. It's my direct and immediate duty. I'm not going to hide anything from you. Not even a thought. How'd the surgery go? She'll live. You have to realize that donated bone marrow is not related. So it's not just the surgery that's important. It's how well the donor material adheres. I'll monitor Betty's condition for 3 months. She'll probably spend that time in the hospital. It could take much longer than that. Rejection of the material could start 6 months from now. We have to be prepared for that. What happens then? In the event of rejection, we'll need to reoperate. We have an agreement with a foreign donor. I explained the situation when I first started negotiations, so we have a donor for a second operation. You will only be required to pay the money in this case. The reoperation will cost about the same. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's not assume the worst. Let's hope for the best. I've done everything I can. That's what I wanted to hear from you. Tell me, can we visit Betty the same way we used to? Yes, of course. But in the first few days after surgery, it's best to cut down on the visits. She needs rest and quiet. Michael was reassured. William's words had reassured him. Now he was sure Betty would live. That was the most important thing. She's awake. Michael asked quietly as he entered the room. Yes, I'm awake, Betty replied with a smile on her face. What? How are you feeling? You know, not bad. The only weakness, of course, is still there. But William told me that's normal. I need more sleep and rest. Yeah, he's absolutely right. I won't be long. I'll come and see you every day. Benjamin called today. Asked me to come in for a quick vacation. He's probably planning on firing me. What makes you think that? Why would I? You've only been gone for 2 weeks, and you gave him a heads up. You've made it official. I'm the one Kathy's probably gonna fire. She's not gonna wait a year for me to get back to work. She'll have the whole station on her ass. Have you talked to her yet? Oh, come on, when have I ever not? Well, I'm going to rest. I've got a headache. Everything's blurry. How will you talk to Benjamin? Call me. Okay. Come on. I'll go get a reaction. From Benjamin Michael. I didn't expect it. Turns out he knew all about the Betty situation and how mean Ethan was to her. And that's how things get out so fast in the office. It was like they didn't come here to work, but to drink coffee and gossip. He grinned to himself as he listened to his boss's sympathetic tone. He didn't fire him. On the contrary, he offered the best option that Michael had already thought about, but did not dare to ask for. Managers can work in a shift schedule, though at half the rate, but it is stable. 2 days work. 2 days you can go to the hospital to Betty and take care of her. The rest of the days Christina will visit. I couldn't think of anything better for the situation. Kathy didn't do anything cruel either. A week after the surgery, she contacted Betty herself and offered to work remotely after the main period of rehabilitation. She would be able to return to work in 3 months. There you go, and you said she'd fire you. She'd fire you. Benjamin, he's a normal person, he understands. As you can see, our team does not leave its honest and loyal employees in trouble. Betty smiled. Thank you for coming. You don't have any days off. Why don't you get some rest? Yeah, I'm not tired, Michael said. Listen, what I wanted to ask you. He stopped talking because he didn't know how to say it. Well, go ahead, ask. What do you want to do with Ethan? After rehab, of course, we should file for divorce, so there won't be any unnecessary paperwork. And after everything I've been through, I realize I want to be free. I wonder if it can be done remotely. We have no children. We're supposed to get a divorce too. I'll find out. Actually, I was just asking. What if he comes back, apologizes? No, he had the opportunity and he never took it. I'm not ready to forgive him now. Just be honest. Did you know he and Kathy were having an affair? You know, the affair. The whole office knew. Didn't you notice? Honestly, I guessed. I didn't even guess. I knew it was true, but I decided not to make a big deal out of it. After all, we'd been together a long time. All men go out, and we're no better. They usually have younger mistresses, but he must be a special breed. Maybe he was hoping for some kind of privilege. I don't know. It's none of my business now. She decided that solitude would be the best way for her to live, at least in the short term. Michael understood that without words. He was willing to wait. He was sure that in time she would get over everything that had happened to her, and then maybe they could be happy. 4 years passed. Drunk again, I can't get away from you. You've driven your mother to the grave, and you're still at it. Screaming at Ethan. When are you going to start living a normal life? When did you come back from the capital? That's how it started. I've been putting up with you for 4 years now, Mother. I couldn't stand it anymore. What are you yelling about? I need to honor my mother. She's been dead for 6 months. What man fell in? Ethan's out in the hallway with another bottle. All right, make dinner. I'm gonna go watch TV. He's tired. He's tired of drinking and partying. Tired. Poor guy. Ethan hadn't worked for 4 years. He lived on his mother's and sister's money and had a few odd jobs, as long as he had enough for a bottle. Good evening, dear viewers. This is the program These Hard Human Fates and I, its host. The loud voice of the announcer sounded from the room. Wouldn't it be nice if they put on some soap operas? Again, they will show dysfunctional families and raise money to save poor children. Ethan thought to himself, but he didn't have the energy to change channels. He was so drunk that he could hardly make sense of what was going on around him. All right, I'll watch this crap. I've got to socialize, don't I? 4 years ago, Michael came to our program from the capital. The host continued. He told us the story of his friend, who inspired thousands of our viewers to fight cancer. Our viewers were also involved in raising funds that were spent on Betty's rehabilitation after her bone marrow transplant surgery. Now she is not only completely healthy. This woman's life has changed dramatically. Tell us how you got through the toughest part of your life, how you beat the disease, and what else happened in your life. You know, they say life ends at 40. That's not what I can tell you. At 40, life is just beginning, and I'm a prime example of that. Betty had a smile on her face. I see that you came to the studio not alone, and today you are accompanied not only by your beloved husband, but also by this cute little girl, continued the host. Yes, you know, in the last few years, so many miracles have happened in my life that I don't even remember that past life, which was leukemia surgery, long 8 months of recovery, betrayal. Betty continued her story. When the doctor finally told me that the donor bone marrow had taken root, I was incredibly happy. Mom and Michael were too. It meant I was going to live. But a year after that, another miracle happened in my life. Well, here it is, my daughter Cindy. A real miracle. We're just a baby, but we'll grow up soon enough. It's your first child, right? It wasn't a terrible decision to make, considering your age and health. The doctor said that leukemia, even if I hadn't had the surgery yet, would have no effect on the baby, and that I would be able to have a baby with this disease. But fortunately, I got pregnant when I was healthy. Yes, my daughter is long awaited. For the 20 years I lived together with my ex-husband, unfortunately, I was not able to become a mother. But I really wanted to. You said betrayal. Were you referring to your ex-husband? As far as I know, he left you as soon as he found out he was sick. And sometime later, you were officially divorced. How is your relationship now? Yes, you said it right. In fact, we were together for 20 years. We got married when we were students. My mom gave us a one-bedroom apartment when we split. Turns out he lived with me all those years for the apartment. I also helped him get a job. And as soon as things got difficult, he left. But that's all in the past. Why bring it up? I don't regret anything. I'm absolutely happy now, and that's the most important thing. In the past, you worked as a senior accountant, and now you have a chain of handmade clothing stores. How did that happen? You know, while I was in the hospital for 3 months, I couldn't work at all. I was on sick leave during that time. But I got so bored sometimes, so I asked Michael to bring me some knitting needles and thread. I started knitting socks, hats, mittens, simple things like that. And then, when I continued to work from home, I couldn't give up my hobby and started sewing things too. Michael offered to make things to order, to advertise on the internet, to sell them through the site. I thought, why not? Naturally, I didn't work alone after that. Orders became more and more. More I could not cope, hired people. Most of them are moms in maternity leave, who in their spare time sew good things, and I buy them back. There are also professional tailors. Now we already have a whole staff, you could say that. First, we promoted ourselves on the internet, and then we opened a few stores offline. Network is a bit of a mouthful, of course. But now we have 5 outlets in the capital, and I hope that we will grow. The fatal disease, operation, betrayal of her husband, new love, opening a business, a daughter, and all this in 4 years. Betty, when do you keep up with everything? Really, when do I keep up? Sometimes I ask myself that question, she chuckled. There's really no secret. I've just learned to prioritize and always do only what I really need to do. And I've learned to ignore the mediocre. What can you wish our viewers goodbye? Never give up. Believe in yourself. And remember that dark streaks are always followed by light streaks. And if it seems to you that this is the worst thing that happens to you in life, perhaps you are wrong. And this is the best thing you've been waiting for. You're gonna make it. What a Betty. What a goat, thought to himself, Ethan. The last thing he wanted to do right now was take something heavy and smash the TV. But he was so drunk that he fell asleep right in front of the program. After a few weeks, Clara registered the inheritance, and 2 months later she sold the apartment and used part of the proceeds to buy a room for her brother, but she couldn't leave him on the street. He was not a stranger after all. Ethan had enough to pay the rent and buy a modest meal. That was all he needed. Betty and Michael had finished their large country house, where they had moved from their apartment in the capital with their mother and little daughter. They never thought they could be so happy. Betty never even thought of Ethan. He, and the years she'd lived with him, were in her past forever.